This is Jessi Sletten from Empowering Postpartum, and welcome to the Spanglish World Networks on Zingo TV, channels 250 and 251. Please remember to download both the Zingo TV app on the respective app stores on iOS and Android devices. And while you download, make sure to rate and leave a comment. The app is free. Zingo TV is also available on Google Chromecast, Amazon Fire and Fire TV sticks, Roku and Roku sticks, and on all smart TVs 2016 and forward. And we are back this week with a very special episode that's been a long time coming. And I'm, again, Jessi Sletten, your postpartum empowerment coach, helping you feel confident, prepared, and holistically supported for your unique journey into motherhood. And I'm really excited to welcome my guest this week, Alison, who is a board-certified nurse practitioner, and she runs her integrative and functional medicine practice, Wild Rice Wellness, right here in Colorado. So we are Coloradans on the show today, and I'm just so excited that you're here. Thank you, Alison.
Thanks, Jessi. I'm excited to kind of dive in today. And yeah, it's been a long time coming. Hopefully third time's a charm today.
Right. Well, we have a lot of really cool stuff to cover. And I know that the topic that we're discussing today is one that we are both mutually passionate about. And we're going to be chatting about postnatal depletion. And I know that you are an expert in this particular topic. And so I'd love for you to share with us all your knowledge and expertise. But before we do that, I'd love for you to just kind of introduce yourself a bit more and kind of tell us about your story and how you got into the work that you do.
Sure. So yeah, I'm Alison Percowycz. I'm a nurse practitioner here in Colorado, and I started Wild Rice Wellness, my functional and integrative medicine practice, about 2 years ago. And my aim was really to help other women, particularly moms, kind of just feel their best and get well so that they can enjoy motherhood to the fullest. And there's kind of a saying in functional medicine, you either get into doing functional medicine because you were sick or you were smart. I like to think of it as a combination of the two for myself, but my story is very motherhood related and how I got into it. So I had my first baby back in 2018, had some health complications that were, nothing major, but kind of came as a surprise because I thought I was pretty healthy going into the pregnancy. I had gestational diabetes, intrauterine growth restriction, had to have an early induction. The delivery actually went very smoothly, but everything during pregnancy was not textbook like I was imagining it would be. And then the postpartum, for my first baby, I kind of was a little naive thinking like, well, I've seen births, I've, studied and worked in pediatrics, like this shouldn't be that hard. And it really took me by storm. I think the sleep deprivation and some of the postpartum anxiety really kind of threw me off. And I was, in that kind of brain fog haze and, thought I could do it without support. Thankfully, I did have some good family support and support from my husband. But beyond that, I was really unprepared for a lot of the lactation pieces to this and just kind of sorting through a lot of the postpartum health aspects. And then I guess the story, long story short, kind of continues and had some thyroid issues also during my pregnancy that kind of persisted and were all over the place between my first and second pregnancies, and had a hard time getting pregnant with our second baby. That was my kind of pivotal moment where I was like, something's not right. Like I am, a couple years postpartum at this point. I still don't feel that great. I just kept being told by all the providers that I was seeing that everything is normal. Like you're just a mom. And that really kind of struck a chord with me that I was like, if this is how I'm feeling and I'm having such a hard time navigating the conventional medical system, there's gotta be other women out there struggling as well. So that's where I kind of dove into functional medicine, figured things out for myself, and with the help of my own functional and integrative medicine practitioner that I still see, and really learned about the depletions that we see postpartum. I had my, all my labs tested, and I had so many nutrient depletions. And once we restored everything and I started working on all those kind of foundational lifestyle approaches, supplement, nutrition, thyroid was better, energy was better, and we got pregnant with our second baby. And he was born in 2021. No pregnancy complications. So no diabetes, no growth restriction, like 39-week delivery, no, early induction. And I think it just was a really powerful message that I learned for myself and now to share to others that like things can change. And I think if you really focus on mom's health, before pregnancy, during pregnancy, afterwards, we can just change the outcomes. And then we can get people feeling better.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it is kind of interesting, doing this show. I get to speak to a lot of professionals, who are in this field, and nearly every single one that I have a conversation with has gotten into the work that they do because of their own experiences and the fact that they were like, this is not okay that I'm experiencing this, and I know for a fact other women are experiencing these things too. So I'm ready to make a change, right? And a lot of it is around just being so blindsided by a lot of the things in postpartum. We don't have that village of support around us to kind of help guide us through what to expect and what is normal, what's, something that we could investigate further, or, really listening to that intuition that's saying like, yeah, I get that you're saying my labs are normal, but there's a range there. And I feel like, we can't just ignore like where it's falling on the, on the spectrum. And so, yeah, I just really resonate with your story because I had very similar experiences. And I know that when I focused on the same things like you're talking about, my own health, my own nutrition, really like leaning in to that nutrient store, like knowledge, and knowing like I needed to really prepare myself, and then really work on the back end afterward to, also nourish myself. It made a huge difference with my second postpartum experience as well. So with that being said, I'd love for us to dive into what exactly is postnatal depletion, and kind of just walking us through what that looks like, why it happens maybe, and then we can kind of go from there.
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah. So postnatal depletion or postnatal depletion syndrome, it's not a medical diagnosis, but there was an Australian physician, Oscar Sellerak, who kind of or maybe around like 2015, 2016, started noticing these patterns, or had been seeing them for a while, but started putting two and two together, that he was seeing a lot of these moms he's a family practitioner who had babies. They were kind of complaining of similar symptoms, brain fog, anxiety, feeling tired but wired, just really feeling like drained. And he started looking into it a little bit more, like, why is this happening? And he wrote a book called Postnatal Depletion Cure, I think is the name of it.
Yeah.
And that came out of just a few years ago, kind of outlining everything, but it's really similar. And I actually, once I started diving into this for my own health, came across similar to literature. So I was diving deep into like all of the studies on PubMed and like what nutrients do we need and what ones are we depleted of during pregnancy, childbirth and lactation.
Yeah.
And I think it makes sense, right? I mean, pregnancy we are growing a human, birth is such an energy dependent process that we're kind of depleting even more stores. And then breastfeeding for, a few months, a year, a couple years is really just going to drain everything. If we don't start in a place of optimal health, it's just going to be even worse. So yeah. So postnatal depletion syndrome, again, it's kind of just this constellation of symptoms that we see in new motherhood. And often it's just like, oh, that's normal, right? Like it's normal to have like low libido, brain fog, acne, hair falling out. And it's, some of these symptoms are common, but there's a lot we can do about it.
Yeah.
And then kind of the other thought around this, as you mentioned with like the village, postnatal depletion, it's obviously there's all of those processes that, we are depleted as moms of nutrients, but there's also this change in like, especially in the United States, we don't have the village that even, our parents' generation had, where there may have been multi-generational households or families lived in the same cities. So you had more of that support after birth. And, families cooking meals, a lot of traditions and cultures around the world still have those traditions of, really nourishing warm foods post. People are delivering things, they're taking care of mom, and mom is given this time to rest. And in a fast-paced world, women in the US are often going back to work 6 weeks postpartum, sometimes earlier than that. And even, I was blessed with having a longer maternity leave for both of mine, 12 and 16 weeks. And even then I was like, oh my gosh, like this is really wild to have to like go work, like figure out daycare,
Right.
all this stuff. So I
Yeah.
think a lot of it is, there's like those cultural things that have shifted where we have less support.
Yeah.
And then too, I think, our food is not as nutrient dense. And then
Mhm.
the sleep deprivation it's a thing, right? We can't
Right.
it, but there are, certainly strategies that I work with my patients to say like, okay, we want to get you in the best place so that when you are able to rest, you're getting good sleep. So
Yes.
those are kind of like the three main pillars of like the postnatal depletion syndrome. And we do, in functional medicine, generally, whether we're looking at a postpartum mom or someone, on the fertility journey, we're
Yeah.
looking at the root causes. So we want to know, like, what is your nutrition like, stress levels? Are you sleeping well? How are you exercising? And then deep diving into the lab. So looking at those personalized lab results. And again, as you mentioned, Jessi, there's such a wide range when you
Yeah.
look on those reference ranges that
Right.
we know, you feel better if you're optimized. And
Right.
especially when we're thinking of like fertility and pregnancy and postpartum
Mhm.
and chasing little ones around, like it's kind of like running a marathon. We need
Right.
to have those stores of vitamins and minerals at that optimal level, or we
Right.
will see a lot of these symptoms persist. And I think it's interesting because a lot of this, it's not talked about, right? You kind of get your like 6-week checkup. Maybe you have a couple visits postpartum, but
Yeah.
we're traditionally or, commonly checking labs to see where everything is at. We're not
Yeah.
really looking at like nutrition and, where a lot of it's like, how is lactation going? Let's see your incision. Is there any lacerations we need to look at? Okay,
Right.
all good to go, but we're not really caring for mom in that postpartum period. And that is where I really am just such an advocate where, we really need to shift that. And we're
Yeah.
starting to see, I think, more of that, especially when we're looking at the, kind of resurgence of like everybody going to pelvic floor therapy, or maybe not
Mhm.
everyone, but it's more of a
Right. It's
practice.
more common, right? Mhm.
So yeah, those are kind of the things that are like stand out like high level for postnatal depletion syndrome. And I'm happy to
Mhm.
dive into more details.
Yeah, no, and I think that this is such an important conversation that we're having because awareness is key, right? And same with like the pelvic floor resurgence of people being like, "Oh yeah, that should be something that's like just common practice, right? For all postpartum people to be able to go see a therapist or work on, things beforehand in pregnancy." So by talking about this more and more, hopefully we'll bring that awareness level up and more moms can advocate for themselves. Because you're right, this is not talked about at all with our healthcare providers in mainstream medicine, right? It's like you said, you get checked out physically, maybe they'll ask you about your mental health situation. That is even sometimes not consistent as it should be.
Yep.
And then it's kind of like left at that, there's no, talking about everything else that is going on inside systemically. It's like it's all connected, right? And so
Mhm.
it's super important that we look at it from a big picture perspective and not just isolate these things like physical recovery is on its own and that means you're good. It's like, no, there's so much more that goes into this. And we're doing such a disservice to our women in our society. And it's kind of crazy too, because I feel like this is starting to be talked about more as well, which is really exciting. But the fact that a lot of these, kind of benchmarks or, whatever we're looking at for these levels of nutrients or any of the things really that we look at are all based on, middle-aged men, right? And it's like there was no actual work or studies done on not only the female body, but the female body when it is pregnant and when it is postpartum. And so, like, these are all just kind of based on averages that don't even maybe apply to us. So maybe even these ranges that we're looking at aren't even that accurate. You know what I mean? So it's like it's kind of mind blowing when you think about it in that way.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the fact that women weren't even required to be included in research until 1993 is just mind blowing. And
I know.
exactly, there's so many lab ranges that are just, like you said, they're focused on men, or it's kind of like that's 95% of the population. And I
Right.
always tell patients, like, I don't know about you, but I don't want to be like normal, right? Because
Right.
normal in our country, at least, is
It's not
generally not very good.
Yeah.
We want to feel optimal. And,
Yeah.
and really a lot of it comes down to just those foundations. And if we can look and get things optimized, not only are we going to feel better like now and in these early motherhood periods, but
Yeah.
for a lifetime to come. And that's why I
Mhm.
always tell patients too, like, if we can lay these foundations now, our later decades, we're going to have less health ailments. We're going to feel good in those final decades of our life, which is what we all want, right? We want to be
Right.
healthy, playing with our grandkids, on the floor with them. So it really is, it's not just about like getting you feeling better now, but
Right.
setting up those foundations so that our health is good for the rest of our lives.
Absolutely. Yeah. I am always telling my clients too that it's a long-term health plan, right? Is yes, we're planning for the immediate and the now and wanting to get you through that and optimize your healing and your energy levels and all these things, but it's like it's a long-term health implication how we are healing in the short term, right? And so it's super important that we're thinking about it in that way. Just like you said, it's foundational and it's really going to be what sets us up for the rest of our lives. And it's interesting because I had read, that how we heal and how we go through our postpartum experiences and our hormones and all these other things can actually impact how then we transition into menopause. And so it's all connected,
Yeah.
and it's something that we just don't get taught at all, and it's something that providers don't check in on with us. And so it's really important that we know what to ask for, so we can advocate for ourselves. And I know that was something that you did want to talk about a little bit more around, what nutrients should we be looking out for this depletion? What's most common to be, causing issues? And then like, how do we request getting these kind of testing done, even if we are in the conventional, medical system? So I'd love to kind of start diving into those things.
And I am, such a strong advocate, right? I am just one person, one provider in Colorado. And there, oftentimes if you have a good relationship with your primary care or your OBGYN, these are not crazy labs to request.
Right.
Like I always too, when I'm working with my patients, very cost conscious, right? A lot of functional medicine, there can be some really expensive tests that are out of pocket. And I really find that getting a really good history paired with some basic lab work that you can get done at a regular lab, LabCorp,
Right.
Press, the local hospital, can give us some really good insight. So I'm always, you just have to advocate. And sometimes that means being the squeaky wheel,
Yep.
bringing in research, telling them why you want to get these checked. And then having, kind of just, if you don't feel like they're listening to you, finding another provider.
Yes.
So that's kind of
Mhm.
step one, is like, you have to be an advocate. And it's not, I always like to say the providers in the conventional system are very well-meaning. I'd still
Yes.
work in the conventional system
Mhm.
one day a week at the University of Colorado here. And it's a big system, right? The visits are shorter. There's not a lot of time to focus on lifestyle stuff. It's kind of
Right.
just like the algorithm that they're put into. So I
Mhm.
think, if you have a good relationship and you come with the information of, hey, like I read this, or here's a study, I really want to get these checked to make sure that everything is looking good.
Yeah.
A lot of doctors and providers are receptive to that. And sometimes, we'll find, especially like I love a lot of the midwives that I work with at the
Mhm.
university, they tend to be very open to looking into things a little bit more. So just
Yeah.
advocating, finding a provider who will listen, because in the conventional system, they are there.
Right.
You just have to.
Absolutely. Yeah, and like you said, don't be afraid to change. If you aren't feeling heard, validated, supported in the way that you need to be by your provider, like there you are not in a contract to
Yeah,
stay. Like get out of there. Like find somebody who will listen to you, that you do feel that connection and that safe space to
yeah,
bring things to. Because
absolutely.
if we aren't bringing those to our providers, there's no way for us to, get the. That we need. So, but that safety is super important so that you feel that you can voice what's going on. And then, like you said, being prepared, I think is a huge piece of it. And it can get you so much farther if you really are intuitive about knowing your own body, knowing what doesn't feel quite right to you and where, things might feel off balanced, and really keeping track of that so that you can bring that to your provider and they have more information to be able to, figure out what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And it should be a partnership, right? I think,
Yes.
long ago there was kind of like the hierarchical where you
Yeah.
had the provider, they told you what was going to happen and what medication you were going to take, but it should be a partnership. And just as you said, I think there is always that like intuitive gut feeling, like, something is off. And a lot of times, like, I always ask patients, like, what do you think is going on? And in my intake, I actually say, like, when was the last time you felt well? What do you think you need to heal? And like, kind of what do you think is going on? And oftentimes we know, I feel like, especially women, like, we're so in tune with things that listening to your gut. And again, if you don't have the provider that's going to listen, finding someone who will. And again, these labs aren't, it's not like you're asking them to run like a zillion labs that like are really off the wall. I really am looking at a lot of basic things. So in women, for when we look at like postnatal depletion and like kind of optimizing health in the postpartum period, I always tailor things, and we might add on things depending on the patient, but kind of the standard framework would be, I still look at the normal stuff, like a complete blood count. So we're looking for any signs of anemias, infections, things like that. Complete metabolic panel to make sure that hydration is good, kidney function, liver function, all the basics are accounted for. Looking at blood glucose levels. That's something I stress with patients. I think in the early postpartum period, especially, it's so hard to get into that rhythm of like eating at regular intervals.
Right.
I always am talking about, we're making sure we have balanced meals, balanced snacks, so we can have those more stable glucose levels. And checking in on labs can be helpful for that. So looking at a fasting glucose, a fasting insulin, hemoglobin, A1C, those are all very common, very cheap tests to get run, covered by insurance, which is great. Thinking more specifically, I always get a full thyroid panel in the postpartum period. 1 in 12 women will be diagnosed with a postpartum thyroid issue, which is a huge percentage.
It is.
And it can be either. So we will sometimes see this short-lived phenomenon called postpartum thyroiditis, which is actually where we are hyperthyroid. So we're creating too much thyroid hormone, which often kind of revs us up. So when we think of like postpartum anxiety or hypervigilance, feeling kind of just a little bit antsy or wired, sometimes that can be that. It often sorts itself out, but if we're not checking, we kind of don't know where we're at as far as that goes in supporting the thyroid. More commonly, we do see postpartum hypothyroidism or like Hashimoto's thyroiditis, where we're seeing low thyroid. That can have big impacts. So we see postpartum depression be more prevalent, skin changes, difficulty with lactation. So that's a critical one. And looking at the full thyroid panel, so that looks like a TSH, a free T4, thyroid antibodies, free T3, and reverse T3, because that's the whole picture. So we want to see, what is our pituitary gland doing? What is our thyroid gland doing? How are we utilizing these hormones? And I will admit, this is one of the areas I see most commonly be disturbed in postpartum women. And it's the one that we can change. So in the conventional model, thyroid disease is kind of like, well, your TSH hits a certain range, you're going to be on medication, and that's that. But we know even a lot of these postnatal depletion nutrients play a role in thyroid hormone production. So we really want to make sure that we're kind of filling the tank. We're addressing all those things. Sleep and stress, those also impact the thyroid. So we will sometimes see some subtle changes to like the free T3 and reverse T3, and those will get better as, baby's sleeping better. We're kind of in that rhythm, but it's something I like to keep an eye on, because if it doesn't sort itself out, that is an area where sometimes medication is helpful, and we may want to go down that road if we do lifestyle things and nutrient things, and it's just not helping. So I do still, fully believe like there's a time and a place for medications, and if we need it during the postpartum period, by all means, let's do that. So that's the thyroid. And then as far as nutrients, I always want to check like an iron panel with ferritin to make sure that there's no anemias, iron storage to make sure that is beefed up. Oftentimes, depending on the delivery, we will see that, with blood loss, Or if we haven't been eating like a lot of iron-rich foods, ferritin, which is our iron storage, will often be quite low.
Yeah.
And ferritin is one of those that it has a super wide range. So generally, like on LabCorp, 15 to 150, right? But there
Right,
is
like, right.
yeah. And we often, and we're seeing more society guidelines change too. So like the
Yeah.
American College of Hematology and Gastroenterology, they're looking at a higher benchmark now, where before it was like, if you're at 20, it's normal, you're good, no need to like supplement or add in more foods or anything. But really 50 should be the cutoff. And I find that women really feel much better from like an energy perspective, hair, skin, vitality, if we're kind of at that 50 marker for ferritin.
Yeah.
And
That's great. Yeah, that's good to know, because I think it's important for us to be knowledgeable to an extent of what we should be looking for in our own labs and stuff. And so that way we know more about what's going on, a full picture, like I think for so many of us, we kind of fall back into that old model of, well, I'm just going to do whatever the doctor tells me to do. Or if they're saying it's fine, then I guess that's what it is, and in reality, the more we can advocate for ourselves, the more that we can learn and educate ourselves on our own health and what we should be looking for, the more power we're going to have and the more ability we'll be able to make a shift and a change in our own health and be able to advocate for those changes for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, just the biggest thing is kind of knowing, and if, no one takes anything else away from this today, like knowing that normal doesn't always mean optimal. And if you're not feeling well, like keep digging, find a provider who will keep digging and looking at everything. So, and, iron is just one example of that, but there are so many, similar scenarios, even like the thyroid, there's such a wide range of what's considered normal. But even when we're thinking of like fertility, we know that a tighter range, and during pregnancy, a tighter range of the thyroid hormones is better. And it's going to be better for, fertility outcomes, pregnancy outcomes, and then just feeling well. So I think that's kind of like the big thing I always tell patients. And oftentimes patients will find functional medicine because they've been told everything is normal, but they still don't feel good. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. And I love that, because just because it's normal doesn't mean it's optimal. Right. And I think that that's such a great thing to keep in the back of your mind when you're looking at all this stuff. And another thing that's very similar to that is, just because something is common does not mean that it's normal or that, we have to accept it, because I think that that's often something we fall into too in the postpartum timeframe. Well, it's common for people to have these issues, to have depression, to have anxiety, to have, struggles with lactation, but that doesn't mean we have to, it's normal, right? Like it's not something that we should just dismiss if it's impacting our life, right? And so I think that those two things are super important to take away from this conversation for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the common but not normal, and normal but not optimal. Yes,
exactly.
And that's kind of where advocating comes in, and finding that team of, whether it's a lactation specialist, an airway dentist, like who's going to look at to see what's going on for lactation and what can we do, finding a pelvic floor therapist, mental health therapist. I am always advocating too for my patients, like we've got to connect you with the right people, because these things that may be common are not normal.
Absolutely. And curating that team ahead of time is so beneficial, because when you're in the trenches, they're having so hard for you to advocate for yourself in the moment. If you've had this set up, you've made these connections, you have an outline of who all these providers could be for you, that makes getting the help so much easier, because you're not having to do all this research and finding these people. If you don't need them, great, no harm, no foul, right? There's no downside to being prepared.
Yeah. And I think that's like a big piece too with the postpartum period. And I know you're so passionate about this is, we focus a lot on like the birth plan and what am I going to bring to the hospital, but then it kind of stops there. And, there's some women who will like do some meal prepping, which I think is great. There's so much more that list of people who you can call or are like good resources for if this happens when you're not sleep deprived and stressed and anxious about getting out the house. So where those resources are and who to call is such a great piece of advice.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. It's just that proactive piece. But if you also, I always say too, it's never too late to get that help.
Yeah,
So if
totally.
you're in the trenches right now and you're like, I am struggling, like, do not be afraid to raise your hand and say that, and even ask for help for getting the connections if you need, people
Yeah.
like Allison, me, we're here to help support you. So if you're having certain things that are going wrong or you're not feeling great about it, there is tons of resources that connect people. And one support that I really love always mentioning is Postpartum Support International. They
Mhm.
have resources lined up already within your state that you can reach out and ask them and say, this is what I'm struggling with. Can you help me find a provider? And they will do all the legwork for you, because that's what we need. Is we need those people who can be in the middle for you to be able to help guide you to the right places. So I just wanted to mention that here for people who are listening. That's a great resource to be able to look at and find the right providers that you need.
Yeah, absolutely. I always send people over to their database, and
Yeah.
it's, just knowing that there are resources. And like you said, it's never too late. And I mean,
Right.
even on the postnatal depletion side, I often will see women that have had multiple kids. They're, maybe their oldest is 9 or 10 years old,
Yeah.
youngest maybe like 3, 4, but they've had multiple kids. And they will say, the last time I felt well was before my first
Mhm.
baby. And they've been
Right.
going and having kids and, breastfeeding for a year or two, and then doing it all over again and again.
Yes.
And we see these, depletions will compound if they're not addressed. So kind of on the front of like, it's never too late. If you're, years postpartum and you're like, yeah, I've never really felt like myself since my first baby or before my first baby, like
Yeah.
it is not too late. Like there is so much we can do, even down the line. And I see a lot of women, in that situation where they didn't really know what to ask for, or they just kind of
Yeah.
thought this was normal. But now that we're kind of talking about these things more, they're reaching out and like, yeah, I really have not felt normal since my first baby 7 years ago, 8 years ago, whatever it
Yeah.
is.
Right. Yeah. And oh, what a heartbreaking thing, right? To have to struggle for that long. But there is hope that they don't have to continue down that path, when they do reach out and find the right support and resources and figuring out what's going on and just really putting on their investigation hats, right? And feeling like, okay, I don't have to just accept that this is how I'm going to feel the rest of my life. Like I deserve to feel the best that I can,
Yep.
and finding the people who can make that happen for me, is super important.
Yeah.
One of the things I know you were talking about, so iron was a big one. And do you have a couple other like kind of
Yes.
big players that you look at?
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, we got a little sidetracked, but yeah.
No,
So
that's okay. That was probably me.
That's okay. All good stuff. I always look at, so iron, magnesium is typically
Yes.
low. And that one I love to call it like the magnificent mineral or the mama
Mhm.
mineral, because it's very calming, from a mood perspective, muscle tension perspective. We often see that it's low or suboptimal in postpartum women.
Yeah.
And it's a good one because we know like our topsoil is lacking magnesium compared to how it was 50 years ago. So our food
Right.
sources don't have as much of it these days. So that one is always on my list to check. Looking at zinc too. So another mineral that a lot of people kind of don't know as much about, or maybe they think about it in the setting of like having a cold or something.
Yeah.
But this one is kind of interesting because copper and zinc work inversely of one another. So if
Mm.
copper is high, zinc is usually low. And
Right.
during pregnancy, we actually need more copper.
Mhm.
So we have higher copper, lower zinc. And then when we get to postpartum, we sometimes will see that higher copper persist and the
Mm.
lower zinc. And
Yeah.
with that, higher copper, we'll see things like kind of more anxiety symptoms, hypervigilance, just feeling a little bit more irritable,
Yeah.
anxious. And, zinc is kind of the opposite. It's very calming. So we know when from like an anxiety and depression kind of perspective, zinc is very calming. So I don't often check copper because it is a more expensive test, but looking at zinc, and we can kind of get, if zinc is low, we can assume that copper is generally probably too high.
Higher.
So we'll
Right.
supplement a little bit there.
Yeah.
But it is a really great one. And it's also a building block for a lot of our hormones. So when
Yeah.
we're thinking of like those postpartum, hormone shifts, having adequate zinc is going to be really helpful. And skin, hair, nails, all those things that we see in the postpartum period, maybe being more brittle or ridges on the nails, hair loss, zinc is going to be really helpful there.
Yeah.
So that's another one. Vitamin D, a lot of controversy around this one for whatever reason, but even here in sunny Colorado,
Mhm.
I have never, and I can say this now after seeing hundreds of patients, I've never checked someone who has not been supplementing that has an optimal level.
Wow.
And again, that vitamin D is one of those where it has a very wide range, anywhere from like 15 to 20 might be considered normal, all the way up to 100. The
Yeah.
sweet spot is probably about 50 to 80
Mhm.
grams per milliliter. And we, often need to supplement. I think, we're not spending as much time outside as we were.
Right.
Many people are more conscious of like wearing sunscreens and, protective
Mhm.
clothing. But even in Colorado where we have sunshine, not today, but
Right. For the first time in months.
but I see it be very low. And there are a lot of research articles, even in looking at postpartum depression, that show
Yes.
low vitamin
Mhm.
D is going to contribute to that. So, and low vitamin D levels have also been correlated with antidepressants like SSRIs not working as well. So it's kind of
Mhm.
that like if we don't address that, we might just be, having to up the dose of medication or just not
Right.
doing well. So, vitamin D for mood, cognitive function, brain fog, fatigue, again,
Mhm.
skin, hair, nails, all those things. It's really important. It is a hormone. So we need it again for, appropriate production of our hormones. So I think that's a big one that I always test on patients as well.
Yeah. Those are
Uh,
great.
I'm trying to think of what else. Vitamin D, we said that, magnesium, zinc. I do look at B vitamins too. So vitamin B12 and folate.
Mhm.
Again, those are often low in the postpartum period. Even, most prenatals will have some B vitamins in them.
Right.
Generally, they're not enough to kind of support optimal function
Yeah.
unless you're taking something like Needed, which is one of my favorite prenatals because it really is very comprehensive and it has a lot more B vitamins in them.
Yeah.
But again, when we're thinking energy levels, cognitive function, mood, B vitamins are really critical. So, if B12 and folate are low, we often assume a lot of the B vitamins are. So things like riboflavin, which also contribute to mood. We really want to make sure that these are all optimized.
Yeah. No, I think that's so good to know and understand. And I think something that kind of is good to keep in mind too is like we want to get our nutrition as kind of like our baseline, right? And really
Yes.
making
Yep.
sure that we are really investing in our own nutrition and focusing on those nutrient dense foods. And then, like you said, if we're really good there, then that's when we kind of bring in the supplementation. I think one of the things that sometimes a lot of people skip is that nutrition piece and they try to just provide everything through supplementation and it's not as bioavailable as our food is. And so I think that that's something that I really try to encourage all pregnant and postpartum moms to really focus in on that nutrition piece and making sure that you're nourishing your body the best that you can so that you can help bring up those levels. And then you can always stick in those supplements if it's still kind of straggling behind.
Absolutely. And that's what I always advocate, like a food first approach.
Yes.
Because again, you're not only getting like those specific micronutrients that we would supplement with, but you're
Right.
getting the phytonutrients. So, and the fiber, which we know supports our gut microbiome, which can have implications on health and
Right.
mood and all the, we're learning so much more about the microbiome, but that's totally true. Getting things from food as much as we can and then supplementing where we need to. And that's always my approach is like, okay, you're low in these things. Here are some foods that are really easy to add in, especially in the postpartum period. And I know you advocate for this too, is like those easier recipes or quick foods that are really nutrient dense.
Yes.
I provide just recipes, quick snack ideas that are going to be good for balancing blood sugar, really nutrient dense. So we get the most bang for our buck. And then supplementing when we need to. And
Yeah.
sometimes we don't need to supplement ongoing. I always tell patients like, if we start these supplements, we're going to monitor things. And our
Yeah.
goal is maybe to like build stores back up. And then as we're doing that, we're shifting in and getting more of the foods in that we need. And
Yes.
sometimes it's just that reminder of, oh yeah, I should be getting more greens or,
Mhm.
summer's the best time because we can get so much more produce and,
Yes.
eating the rainbow and all the things, but
Right.
it takes time to like build in those habits. And especially in the early days, like I always tell moms too, like, don't stress. Like if you have a day and you've had no
Yes.
fiber, like it's
Right.
one day, it's not a problem. Um,
Right.
We just want to focus on like making progress in small changes so that it becomes more of a habit and not this like huge, overwhelming change that you're making in the midst of like breastfeeding and being up all night. So trying to make it as easy and less stressful as possible.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then planning those things again ahead of time can be very helpful because you're like, okay, I
Yeah.
have my, snack little stash in my, recovery space, and they're all easy to grab, but also high impact foods that can be on the go, right? When we are just so busy. Because the biggest thing is you have to eat. Like is if don't not eat. Like that's the worst thing you can do, right? So eat as often as your body is telling you you need. Doesn't ignore the clock. If you're up breastfeeding at 4 a.m. and you're hungry, address that hunger, and it's something that I think that we really have to lean into that intuitive eating side of things, especially in postpartum and in pregnancy as well. But I think that our body can tell us sometimes like what we are missing through cravings and, things like that too. I think it's a kind of powerful tool to supplement with all the other things that we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And kind of listening to those cues, like if you're thinking like a really good bright salad sounds good, like you probably need all those nutrients, right? And I always, advocate for kind of switching things up, eating what's in season to make it more affordable, nutrient dense. And yeah, kind of tuning into those cravings. If you're craving something, with like a lot of like chocolate can often be like a magnesium deficiency. So we do kind of know there are some of those cues. And then kind of, focusing through food on the building blocks, right? Protein is so huge. And I see a lot of women in the postpartum period are not getting enough protein to support just not only themselves, but lactation and energy levels and muscle building. So, making sure we're getting enough protein, it's going to help stabilize blood sugar. Fiber, again, keeping things regular in the bowel, making a thriving microbiome. Those are kind of the two that I focus on the most, but especially, carbohydrates kind of often get a bad rap, but when we're nursing, we need those. So like not neglecting the carbohydrates and making sure that we're getting enough of those in our diet as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And when it comes to carbohydrates, I always, and with a lot of other things too, is like don't just eat them on their own, right? You want to pair them with something so that will help with the thing of the blood sugar. So if you have a carb that you want to eat, add a fat or add a protein to help balance that. And then it will help you feel full too, for longer periods of time. So I think it was Lily Nichols who I really enjoy her, book and research and all this stuff. But she has a saying, never eat your carbs naked, because I think that's such an easy thing to remember. And it's true. Like, don't just grab a piece of bread. If you want the bread, great, let's do it. But maybe put some peanut butter or nut butter on top of it, or some avocado, smash it up and have avocado toast, and that's really helping to balance those snacks and meals as much as you can.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, we've all experienced that, right? Like the dessert on an empty stomach or maybe higher carbohydrate meal. And you feel that crash in energy, in mood, and in especially early postpartum, like keeping blood sugar stable is just going to make you feel so much more optimal rather than kind of like riding that blood sugar roller coaster all day because you haven't maybe planned or prepared. And, I know you talk a lot about like stocking your postpartum pantry and making sure you have like, Costco, like get all the nuts, the nut butters, the easy stuff that you can grab and go, like RX bars or Go Macro bars, just to make sure that you've got stuff that if you are in a pinch, it's going to be balanced, or, grab a handful of nuts and some fruit, or, apple and cheese, stuff that's really easy, quick, intuitive. I even like in busy periods will like put a list on our fridge for me and my husband, like, here's what we have, like, if you need a snack, like XYZ. Cause there are times, I think even my kids are a little bit older now, but if we have a busy period, you just kind of forget and like, then you don't eat, or you like grab whatever you see first. But it's like, no, we actually, we have some beef sticks that are, grass fed, really high quality, like have that with some fruit. So you can remember easily those choices and things that you have, and just making sure that you kind of stay stocked up on all those quick, easy things.
Absolutely. Yeah. Make it easy on yourself, as much as possible, having that done, that thought work done, each week or ahead of time. And just like you said, going to Costco, stocking up on those things that are, more shelf stable, but still really high impact with nutrition, is always going to be really beneficial and easier for you to make those choices and incorporate more of those nutrient dense foods than, if you don't prepare ahead of time, you don't really have those in stock, you're going to grab you know, like for me with my first, it was always dry cereal because it was there. And I was like, just, you know, eating this dry cereal because it's fast, it's easy, had
Yeah,
the
yeah,
sugar, you know, and it never helped because I was always starving, you know?
right, right.
Yeah. Well, this has
Yeah.
been such a great conversation. I know that we hit on a lot of the big topics that we wanted to talk about, you know, self-advocacy, making sure we're asking for these panels to be done if our providers aren't providing them, you know, automatically, what to look for, optimal levels of certain nutrients and all those things. But if you have any other kind of like last minute things that you wanted to share when it comes to postpartum nutrition or just maybe self-care in general and postpartum time frame, I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, we talked, a lot about the nutrient and nutrition piece, but again, all of those foundational principles where, stress reduction, focusing on good sleep, which in the early days is challenging and even when they're toddlers too. But I think, trying to instill in some mindfulness practices because we are, especially in early postpartum, in that like fight or flight mode kind of constantly. And if we do get the opportunity to sleep, that makes it really hard to kind of wind down and shut down. So, even if it's stepping outside, getting in the sunshine, taking a few deep breaths, like it doesn't have to be an elaborate, like 20-minute meditation practice. Just sprinkling in those bits, but throughout the day are going to be helpful. And, when we think about nutrition, I often, and this is hard, like in motherhood, even later, right? You're focused on like, has baby eaten? Is your toddler have what you need? And then you sit down and you shovel the food in because you don't know like who's going to need what, or you're going to be getting up. But I do, when you can, focusing on mindful eating, because when we think of nutrients, we want to make sure that we're not only taking them in, but we need to digest them and absorb them. And if we're in that fight or flight or kind of revved up mode, we really don't have optimal digestion and absorption of the nutrients because we need to, release those digestive enzymes and digestic acid to break things down and absorb the nutrients. So, sitting down, if you're able to, before meals, taking a few deep breaths, trying to eat slowly, putting your fork down between bites and not just kind of shoveling it in, but chewing thoroughly, really enjoying the meal, which is sometimes easier said than done. And this is something I am constantly working on myself. But it really can help, not only from a nutrient level perspective, but, the bloating after meals. If we're in that fight or flight or sympathetic nervous state, we're going to have like slower digestion. And, we call our parasympathetic nervous system our rest and digest branch for the reason, right? We need to be in that mode to actually digest our food. So, I think that's always a huge piece that I'll talk to patients about too is, as much as you can, being mindful and sprinkling in those mindfulness practices, because it's going to help. And even if it is just a few deep breaths here and there, we know there's a lot of research that shows, especially if you're lactating and when you're breastfeeding, that we have coherence with our baby if we're focused on breastfeeding rather than scrolling. And trust me, I know breastfeeding is like a marathon and you cannot be present for all of it, but can, just even for a few minutes when we're starting those nursing sessions, like, soak it in, take those deep breaths because baby's, nervous system is going to kind of be coherent or be in sync with ours. It's going to be helpful for everybody. So always, big on stress reduction and then getting the people in place, right? Your postpartum work, Jessi, is so wonderful. And had I known that like postpartum doulas were a thing, I think I would have done so much better in my first postpartum period because it was just a lot of those little things where you need those reminders from people who have been there, who have experienced it to say, hey, let's make sure your grocery list is looking good this week. You've got the things that you need. Here's, some lactation resources. Don't forget, like you need to sleep and rest and do the things that are enjoyable too. And having those, people in your village, just advocating for that, whole village perspective is really big and high on my priority list for patients.
Absolutely. Yeah. Making sure that you have somebody caring for you while you care for baby. I think mothering the mother is something that we all really would benefit from embracing again and bringing that concept back because it's so important, like everything stems from how you are healing, how you are showing up. And so neglecting that is only going to, make things harder for your family as a whole, for your baby. And it's just, you deserve that care as well, just as much as your baby does, for sure.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Well,
Yeah.
and I'd love for us to just, share how people can get connected with you. Where can they find you out in the internet world?
Yeah. So my practice name is Wild Rice Wellness, and my website is wildricewellness.com. Wild Rice Wellness on Facebook and Instagram. I'm most active over on Instagram, posting kind of a lot of topics related to motherhood, but also just women's health in general and functional medicine. If you're in Colorado, I'm able to work with patients in person and virtually. If you are not in Colorado and you're looking for a functional medicine provider, the Institute for Functional Medicine is the gold standard in functional medicine training. Their website is ifm.org, and they have a practitioner database for practitioners around the world. So if you're not local to Colorado and you're looking for someone, that is the place I recommend that you go.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you so much again, Allison. This has been such a wonderful conversation. So many great nuggets. I just want to thank you again for coming on the show. Just as a reminder for everybody watching, I want to encourage you to head over to Instagram, to my page as well, at empowering_postpartum. The link in my bio will take you over to my postpartum prep course, Beyond Birth, which is designed to walk you through step-by-step creating this custom and holistic postpartum plan before birth, like we've been talking about, so that you have these tools and resources and strategies to create a peaceful fourth trimester, so you can focus on healing and connection and growth, and you don't have to worry about all the other things that usually stress us out after having a baby. And you can always shoot me a DM too if you have questions. But remember, this show can be heard on Spanglish Radio Network, and you can check out spanglishworld.ca for all the news and programming. Spanglish World, watch it, hear it, read it, download it, and live it. And we'll see you guys next week.
Thanks so much, Jessi.
Bye.